I'm looking in my famous messy Bible. I'm suspicious of people who have neat Bibles. I'm not suspicious of them. I mean, in the sense that I don't trust them. I would just wonder how well read are they. Now, of course, the young people remind me, as I see, I taught worship at Pacific School of Religion for several years and was the worship director. And I would see students saunter into the pulpit with their phones and think, what are they doing? Well, that's where their notes were. So, because they would preach from their phones. I'm old school. I still have this. From the words of Jesus, Matthew 5:23. So when you are offering your gift at the altar, if you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift therefore before the altar. Go first be reconciled to your brother and sister, and then come and offer your gift. I mean, I'm surprised that there's a single church service that ever concludes in churches, ever. I mean, how if we're reading this, really? I mean, just even in their own church.
Yeah.
Why isn't church? This is probably why most Protestant churches don't have communion most Sundays. And we have the explanation, the understanding, because how could they possibly? Obviously, because they're not reconciled with each other. I say this somewhat flippantly, but Jesus felt it was important for us to try to work it out.
Yeah.
Really try to work it out so that in order for us to proceed together as a community in the important work that we have to do, it was so important that we might even have to stop the worship service before we continued. That estrangement, working out estrangement, trumped, sorry, that word, took precedence over the decorum even of worship. That's how significant it is when there's disruption in human relationship. Stop. Pay attention. Pay attention. If there is brokenness in a relationship, make it so important that you don't even let a week go by. That's how Jesus felt about the need for reconciliation. And then try to proceed. Now, I also do believe this. I'm weirdly, to the left of the left in my politics, but rather orthodox in my theology. I do believe that the sacrament of Holy Communion does also give us an opportunity to reconcile too, that there is an irresistible grace quality to Holy Communion, that the Eucharist can maybe help us do something that we can't do on our own, that even broken people gathered at the same table can somehow find something there at least, to help them find a kind of common ground, that they ought not to refrain from table fellowship even if they are broken in their relationship, that sometimes only God's grace can do something that we in our human frailty cannot. Now, that only works for church people, but I think that even when we are experiencing brokenness, that we can find something there, some solace, some inspiration, some comfort, some nourishment, to go out into the world and continue to attempt the work of reconciliation. So Jesus said, at least pause and try before you go to the altar. Another phrase, another time that reconciliation figures. These are in the New Testament, not the words of Jesus, though. And I do think we can distinguish. In Ephesians 2. So Jesus has abolished the law with its commandments and ordinances, that Jesus might create in Jesus' own self one humanity in place of the two, thus making peace, and might reconcile both groups to God in one body through the cross, thus putting to death that hostility through it. So Jesus came in and preached and proclaimed peace to you who were far off, and peace to those who were near. You are no longer strangers and aliens, but you are citizens with the saints and fellow members of the household of God. Jesus used his body as a way of bridging separations. His body. And I think that's a clue for us that I'll get to in a moment about our own works of reconciliation. And also Paul writes in Romans, now concerning spiritual gifts, brothers and sisters, I do not want you to be uninformed. No, that's Corinthians. Sorry, wrong book. Where's Corinthians? Where's Romans 12:1? That's the peril of the messy Bible. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers and sisters, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Your bodies, our bodies which are a gift, our bodies which are good, our bodies which we inhabit, as a way of expressing our convictions. And don't say this lightly, our bodies are gifts. Our bodies are good. Our bodies lead us to life, to love, to sex. Metropolitan community churches are body churches. Right. We're not head churches only, and I don't denigrate our intellect. God gave us our intellect as a gift. But we know something about putting our bodies into as an expression of what we believe. And our bodies may be necessary in part for the work of reconciliation that we're called to. So reconciliation does have a spiritual dimension. Political. Reconciliation has a political dimension. I gave you all copies of this letter from the Birmingham jail. When I was in seminary in the early 1980s, okay, it was mid-1980s, there was at that time a call from a group of clergy that originated actually in the late 1960s at Riverside Church to add the letter from Birmingham jail to the Bible as another epistle. So, I like to add things to my Bible. We say in the United Church of Christ, God is still speaking, right? So I find that very liberating. I have Footnote to Howl by Allen Ginsberg, and a quote by Patti Smith, and a page from Angels in America, and a poem by Edna Stevenson Millay, and a lot of Walt Whitman, and other things, and letter from Birmingham jail. Because these ministers said, this is like Paul writing from prison, Martin Luther King writing from prison, arrested on Good Friday in Birmingham in 1963 because he persisted in engaging in promoting a boycott. That's why he was arrested that day, for his idea that there could be a boycott in Birmingham of stores that would not integrate, right? So he was a big promoter of reconciliation. And this short little letter, which he wrote from memory on little scraps of paper, is something that I think we should read every year on Good Friday when he wrote it. That's why I'm giving you a copy. And you'll see on the inside of the front page, this is the letter that a group of ministers the week before took out as a one-page ad, the call for unity in the newspaper, asking Martin Luther King to cease from his call for the boycott, basically calling him an outside agitator and asking him to leave. So these were all the ministers, white ministers, or clergy. Some were priests, one was a rabbi, saying, this is not the right time. You don't know what you're doing. Stand down, go away. And this was his response, since he had time on his hands in jail on Easter weekend. And I want to urge you just to read it at your leisure and then to always reread it. I read it every year and I get something different out of it. His work for reconciliation was one that involved using his body on a regular basis. And we might respond differently in our use of our bodies, but it does belong in the Bible as far as I'm concerned, right after Revelation. And I'm going to ask two people from MCC Boston each to read one little paragraph from it, because it's great reconciliation literature. Nancy, would you read the part I marked 10? Just read it out loud. Just listen to it. Yeah.
But as I continued to think about the matter, I gradually gained a bit of satisfaction from being considered an extremist. Was not Jesus an extremist in love? Love your enemies. Bless them that curse you. Pray for them that despitefully use you. Was not Amos an extremist for justice? Let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like a mighty stream. Was not Paul an extremist for the gospel of Jesus Christ? I bear in my body the marks of the Lord Jesus. Was not Martin Luther an extremist? Here I stand. I can do no other, so help me God. Was not John Bunyan an extremist? I will stay in jail to the end of my days before I make a butchery of my conscience. Was not Abraham Lincoln an extremist? The nation cannot survive, half slave and half free. Was not Thomas Jefferson an extremist? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. So the question is not whether we will be extremists, but what kind of extremists will we be? Will we be extremists for hate, or will we be extremists for love? Will we be extremists for the preservation of injustice, or will we be extremists for the cause of justice? In that dramatic scene on Calvary's Hill, 3 men were crucified. We must not forget that all 3 were crucified for the same crime, the crime of extremism. 2 were extremists for immorality, and thusly fell below their environment. The other, Jesus Christ, was an extremist for love, truth, and goodness, and thereby rose above his environment. So after all, maybe the South, the nation, and the world are in dire nation of creative extremists.
And Mark, if you read the other.
Things are different now. The contemporary church is often a weak, ineffectual voice with an uncertain sound. It is so often the arch supporter of the status quo. Far from being disturbed by the presence of the church, the power structure of the average community is consoled by the church's silent and often vocal sanction of things as they are. But the judgment of God is upon the church as never before. If the church of today does not recapture the sacrificial spirit of the early church, it will lose its authentic ring, forfeit the loyalty of millions, and be dismissed as an irrelevant social club with no meaning for the 20th century. I am meeting young people every day whose disappointment with the church has risen to outright disgust. Maybe again, I have been too optimistic. Is organized religion too inextricably bound to the status quo to save our nation and the world? Maybe I must turn my faith to the inner spiritual church, the church within the church, as the true ecclesia and the hope of the world. But again, I am thankful to God that some noble souls from the ranks of organized religion have broken loose from the paralyzing chains of conformity and joined us as active partners in the struggle for freedom. They have left their secure congregations and walked the streets of Albany, Georgia with us. They have gone through the highways of the South as torturous rides for freedom. Yes, they have gone to jail with us. Some have been kicked out of their churches and lost support of their bishops and fellow ministers. But they have gone with the faith that right defeated is stronger than evil triumph. These men have been the leaven and the lump of the race. Their witness has been the spiritual salt that has preserved the true meaning of the gospel in these troubled times. They have carved a tunnel of hope through the dark mountain of disappointment.
So, I want to invite everyone later at your leisure to read this and read it over and over and over again, just like we read the Bible over and over and over again, because I don't believe that Martin Luther King was only speaking to the churches and to the country in 1963. Like the Bible, I think that there's a timeless quality to it, and I believe that his words over 50 years ago actually are speaking to our time right now, too, about reconciliation. And I want to say this about reconciliation. Reconciliation has a tandem word: resistance. Reconciliation doesn't just mean you take whatever someone gives to you. There is a time in the process of reconciliation when resistance is just as important. By one of our gifts that we bring to the process of reconciliation is knowing when to exercise and model resistance. There is no reconciliation without the exercise of resistance. And Martin Luther King knew the difference and knew when to model and exercise both. So, reconciliation. What is the gift that MCC knows about reconciliation? We have 50 years of understanding what it means to reconcile sexuality and spirituality. First of all, we know it's never done, never finished. It's a project. In Marxism, we talk about projects. Projects are ongoing. They're not beginning and end. We have 50 years of it. And most people who work on sexuality give up religion, understandably, because it's a mess when it comes to sexuality. What if we bring to the world, the broader world, this notion that actually sexuality, spirituality could be a gift, and you can continue to work it. We have 50 years of that. We also have this. We have learned to reconcile childhood faith with adult faith. Most of us who stick with MCC have a different faith than the childhood faith that we have, right? This has nothing to do with sexuality even, right? We've worked through an immature faith and understood that to have a vitally present faith means working at it, changing, transforming, renewal, constant learning, experimenting, being open to synthesizing, becoming ecumenical and interfaith, science, reason, intellect, or perhaps we come from science, reason, and intellect and have had to learn to be open to more mystical and emotional aspects of religion. I'll tell you, as a Polish Catholic from Detroit, I never thought I would be ordained in a black Pentecostal church in Oakland, California, by Bishop Yvette Thunder. And that I would be praising the Lord in tongues. And I'm so glad I do and did learn that. That's a gift. Most people just give up or they learn one kind. I'm so glad that my faith palate, if you will, has learned to stop reacting and start opening. And I learned that in MCC. The difference between superstition and evolving religion. We also have learned that we don't have to put up with bad religion, right? I'm so sympathetic to our United Methodist friends right now. There's a United Methodist friend, a colleague here whose name is Will Green,